drive car around corners, I'm about to share with you some of the secrets that I've learned about how to make a front wheel drive really handle well. When I started racing front wheel drive Hondas on the dirt, the rear wheel drive guys gave me a bit of courage, said I'd never get the car to drift. Well, I not only got my cars to drift, I got my cars to beat them as well. The way to get a front wheel drive to handle, as far as the rear end is concerned, is to get the back lower than the front. Let me explain the reasons behind that for you that I've found. When you go barreling into a corner at race speed in a front wheel drive and you either back off or hit the brakes, there's a significant transfer of weight from the back to the front. And most front wheel drives sit too high in the back to allow for carrying passengers in the back. And when you lighten the car for racing, it's even worse, the back end comes up more. And so what happens is as you either decelerate or hit the brakes, the car does this. And so you get more weight transferring through to the front. And what happens is the car then goes into an understeer attitude just as you're wanting to turn to go around the corner. So the first way to get a front wheel drive to handle under race conditions is to lower the back. But on a dirt car, you don't want to lower the rear suspension because you're after all the clearance you can get under the mudguards for the big rally tyres. So on a dirt car, I leave the rear suspension at the standard height and I increase the height of the front of the suspension. If you have a look at WRC front wheel drive cars, you'll see that they're sitting up like a praying mantis with, you know, this much clearance between the front guards and the top of the tyre. It looks stupid, but that's the way they make them handle. So on this car, I won't change the height of the rear, I'll jack up the front and I'll show you how to do that later. I'm going to do 4 things to improve the handling of this rear suspension. I'm going to put 4 degrees negative camber on the back, which is an awful lot. Most of you guys know how to do this, but I'm going to make my own adjustable arms for nothing and I'll show you how to do that. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the rubber factory pivot arm bush for an aftermarket nylon one, and I'm going to make some improvements to that mount that gets around a problem that I've found in competition use of it. I'm going to put a bar between the lower mounting points, and I'm going to do that for next to nothing rather than buy some fancy aftermarket thing. And the last thing we'll do after the expense of the build is over is further down the track, the owner of this car will put in competition gas shocks and adjustable coilovers in the back. You wouldn't think so, but these rear lower wishbone mounting points on the car can actually flex. And so I'm going to stiffen up the rear end by putting a bar across there. Now you can buy all sorts of fancy aftermarket ones, but this is just a piece of 1-inch tube and I'm going to weld it on there and it cost me virtually nothing. If you're wondering about the effectiveness of a bar like this, just have a look under the back of any Type R Civic or Integra and you'll see that the factory puts it on. So anything that Honda does to improve their cars, I'm going to do as well. There's the rear lower wishbone mounting point stiffening bar tacked in place, ready to get welded in properly. Honda Civics and Integras made around about the 1990s through to early 2000 have one of the best rear suspensions, I reckon, of any front wheel drive. A lot of front wheel drive cars just have a beam axle and the minimum amount of suspension components that they can put under there. But Honda went to the trouble of making something really good. You've got this long trailing arm which pivots here. You've got a lower wishbone, which we just had a look at the mounting point that I stiffened. And you've got this top wishbone here, as well as the spring there. So, and what this means is this is a double wishbone rear end that floats and the camber of the wheel doesn't change as it goes up and down. That equals really good handling. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this arm and cut it and make it adjustable, because by winding this in I'll pull that angle of that wheel over and add camber to the back. And this is one of the really essential things that make a front wheel drive handle at the back. Here's the rear top wishbone removed from the Integra. Now you can buy aftermarket adjustable ones for about $120, and I've got a set on one of my cars. The advantage of the aftermarket ones is they have a left and a right nut with a double threaded rod, and you can just turn the adjuster and wind it in and out. But really, when you're setting up a rear suspension, you're going to get the angles right and you're going to leave it alone and lock it off. You're not going to be adjusting it in and out and in and out and in and out. So I've come up with a cheap fix, which isn't as adjustable but works just as well. I'm going to take this factory top wishbone and I'm going to cut 30mm or 1 1/8 out of the middle. To make my modified top wishbone adjustable, I'm going to use this old front steering tie rod end. I've sprayed red paint on it to remind me that it's buggered, but I never throw them out, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this section here, which is like a really long threaded nut, and a standard Honda bolt. I'm going to cut that there and cut that there, and by welding each of those onto the 2 halves of the top wishbone, I'll make it adjustable. So we're ready to assemble the modified top rear wishbone. There's the rack end. I've cut that piece off. There's the bolt. I've cut the head off that. That thread's in there. There's the top wishbone. Take the middle piece out. All I'm going to do is probably put a lock nut on it. Weld it together. You've got an adjustable top arm. If you're doing this sort of work and you're a bad welder like I am, don't touch it. Get someone that really can put some strength into those welds and do it properly. But there you go. There's a top adjustable rear wishbone for a Honda. Cost nada. The rear main trailing arm pivots here. And the easy way to undo the 2 bolts that hold that rubber mount is with a wheel brace. You get lots of leverage and the bolts just crack really easily. When I put this back together, I will be twisting that arm thanks to that adjustable top wishbone that I've made, and I will pack washers underneath this mounting point on this side, so instead of that arm sitting like that, it's going to be sitting like that and matching the angle that I'm going to put on when I dial in the camber. It's been a while since anybody's been in the back here. That's what that Daddy Longlegs reckons. But that's what the back of a Honda looks like with the main trailing arm removed. You can see this lower wishbone clearly now and how the strut mounts off the top of it. But wait till you see that pivot arm bush I've just taken out. I've yet to meet one of these on a Honda that hasn't been buggered, but this one's fairly buggered. The weakness of the factory system with this bush is that there's no moving parts in here. This is all rubber, and as the arm moves up and down and backwards and forwards, it fatigues these parts here. Look at this one. And the bottom's not much better. You can see it's all perished, but the top's completely buggered. This is the bush that I'm going to replace. Instead of this factory rubber one, I'm going to put a nylon bush in here, which actually pivots. We've got to drive this bush out of this pressed metal arm. You can't do it by hitting the air, obviously, because the rubber absorbs the energy. The way to do it is we have a big sledgehammer and a big piece of water pipe just the right size. This is a tapered bush. Oh, didn't even need the water pipe. Those edges are not straight, they're tapered and it just falls out. But you can see how buggered that is. Barely hanging on. How could that car handle properly with that in the back? While I've got the hydraulics undone on the back, is a good time to drill a hole for the new line that's going to come through from inside the car and that T-piece that I was telling you I'm going to fit. So now I can bring the brake line straight down there and straight into there. So that is redundant. This is the Nylon rear suspension pivot arm bush kit. Australian Honda owners, take a note of that number. If you only want the bushes and you don't need the pins, just order that number without the A. But for the complete kit, it's 46179A. You also need to be aware that there's 2 sizes in these bushes. There's a 78 and I think the other one's 82mm, so always make sure you order the right one. But this is the standard one for most Civics and Integras. At $120, this is a very reasonably priced kit. You can see instead of rubber, it's nylon, and when you fit it together, the arm is going to pivot on that point. You actually put molybdenum grease on that shaft to make sure that that can move. So it's a great design, but the weakness of it is that the bush is held on the shaft by this circlip which goes there. And what happens under racing conditions where you've got a lot of sideways stresses is the circlip comes off and moves along the shaft, and then the bush starts moving up and down, and it ovalizes and chews out really quick. So I'll show you a simple fix I've got for this. All I'm going to do is replace that circlip with a split pin. To start drilling the hole for the split pin, I'm going to file a flat spot to make it easy to drill it, and I'm going to put my file, the top edge of the file, in line with the top edge of that slot that the manufacturer's made for their circlip. So now I've centre punched a hole, and I'm going to drill a hole right through this for a split pin. You've got a short side and a long side. The long side goes towards the inside of the car. You've got to grease the shaft with molybdenum. You've got to really do this about once a year. Smear of molybdenum on the inside. Got a washer. And a split pin means it'll never move. All the rear suspension's back in. You can see the Nylon bush there. Haven't put the top wishbone back in yet because we're still waiting on the welder. But that's all the alterations that we want to do to the rear end complete. See you in part 6.